But in the meantime, then, Vanessa, let's come to the other front with Russia, perhaps that's Syria.
Yeah, just a very quick report today to point out, we talked about the 3 Republican congressmen that entered Syria illegally, of course, through a crossing that is manned by terrorist groups that are actually under sanctions by the Biden administration. And so very recently, we also talked about the unrest in the Northeast, the US occupied zone, where, of course, on an almost daily basis, the US is stealing Syria's oil. US officials visit Syria's Deir al-Zur in bid to defuse the Arab tribal unrest. The Arab tribes have effectively risen up against the Kurdish separatist occupation of the Northeast. So very familiar to see a US delegation appear in the Northeast to try and settle the situation down. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Syria, Ethan Goldrich, and Major General Joel B. Val heads the alleged coalition against Islamic State. Of course, as I constantly explain, ISIS is nothing more than another proxy of the United States inside Syria and Iraq. They met with Arab tribal leaders and the Kurdish Contra commanders and agreed to address local grievances and de-escalate violence as soon as possible and avoid casualties, the State Department said. Of course, it's not their place to enter northeast Syria, as Syrian officials also condemned US delegations' illegal visit to northeastern Syria, because, of course, it violates the country's sovereignty and state integrity. But the US has consistently done that since 2011. Syria, according to a statement put out by Foreign Minister Faisal Muqdad, support the Arab tribesmen in their battle against the Kurdish Contras because, of course, they perceive this as an opportunity to uproot the Kurdish Contras from the northeast. During this period, the US occupation forces looted and smuggled more Syrian resources to their bases in Iraqi territory, taking out a load of about 95 tankers of oil from the Al Jazeera fields during the past 24 hours. So the theft continues, moving on. And the clashes renew between the US-backed proxy, so-called rebel tribes, the Kurdish Contras in northeast Syria, and the Arab tribes themselves, as we mentioned. But then I want to quickly look at the map of Syria, and I'm sure Kivort will comment on this. Going from west and then going around it as a clock, we had 2 Israeli attacks in the last 2 days, during the afternoon, actually, which is fairly unusual, followed by another one. So first of all was to southern Tartus, to a military base there, which killed 2 Syrian Arab army soldiers and injured others. The missiles were fired from international waters to the west in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Syria. And then from northern Lebanon, they targeted southern Hama, the second area that you can see. Now, of course, these 2 attacks have 2 reasons. One is to create a gap in the Syrian air defense capability to enable Israel, as it perceives, to target what they consider to be the strategic development centers inside Syria, developing both defensive and offensive weapon capability. But at the same time, if you look at the area in Idlib, which is occupied by Al-Qaeda and its various affiliates, you'll see that there has been an increase in military activity to the west of Aleppo, to the south of Idlib and the north of Hama, and to the north of Latakia. So the Israeli attacks never are coincidental. They often come in tandem with either advance by the Syrian Arab Army against terrorist positions or attacks by the terrorists against Syrian Arab Army positions. Then if you go around the map, as I've mentioned before, Syria at the moment, what the US cartel is trying to achieve, of course, is a shrinking Syrian central state. So the northern areas are controlled by US proxies, the Kurdish Contras, and Turkish proxies, which are basically derivatives of the Free Syrian Army, the Muslim Brotherhood extremists. Coming around the map again, you'll see Deir al-Zur. Interesting that the Kurdish Contras currently seem to be withdrawing from this area, from the Deir al-Zur area. And then coming down to Al-Bukamal, which I pointed out quite frequently, is the area that the US wants to gain control of, because this is the opening for Iraq, or the border crossing for Iraq and Iran, to send humanitarian relief into Syria. So I've drawn the yellow line to show where the US wants to gain control, to basically close off much of that eastern border area, because of course it has control at Al-Tanf, its military base, and at Rukban, alleged refugee camp, which is another recruitment center for ISIS and various extremist groups. Then coming to the south, as I've drawn there, the red line showing the areas that are obviously under attack by the forces of proxy forces of Israel and the US alliance, as we've talked about in Sweda and Deir. There have been 2 assassinations of fairly high-level officials in Deir in the last 10 days. And in Sweda, the protests, which are basically sponsored by Israel and the US, and power multiplied by Israel and the US and Western media, are continuing. There have been attempts to take over official centers and institutions there in the last few days. So that, I think, just gives you a very quick update of what is going on here.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Now let's